With my little kids, and I had to leave because my big girls played out at Brexit at 3:30.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the January 23rd, 2018 caucus meeting. Michelle, please call the roll.
Scott?
Here.
Bergio?
Here.
Orcutt?
Here.
Stem?
Here.
Encini?
Here.
Poindexter?
Here.
Salvatore?
Here. Thank you. If everyone would, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Moving on to item number 3, approval of minutes of preceding meeting. It's a regular caucus meeting held on January 9th, 2018.
Motion to approve those January 9th meeting minutes.
Support.
Motion on the floor to approve those meeting minutes properly seconded. Any questions? Comments? Seeing none. Michelle, please call the roll.
Mancini?
Yes.
Scott?
Yes.
Bergio?
Yes.
Orcutt?
Yes.
Stem?
Yes.
Poindexter?
Yes.
Salvatore?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Meeting minutes have been approved. Moving on to discussion, item number 4. First item is Division of Liquor Control, CTRFO 4258665 for a C1, C2, and D6 to J. Bajrangabali, sorry if I'm slaughtering the name, LLC, DBA Brook Park Smokes and Beverage, 5707 Smith Road, Brook Park, Ohio, 44142. From Shiri Varatma, LLC, DBA Brook Park Smokes and Beverage, 5707 Smith Road, Brook Park, Ohio, 44142. Postmark date of this is 2/5/18, per Council President Vecchio.
Mr. Chairman,
Salvatore.
through the chair to the law director, it would appear that they're keeping the same name, so this is just a family transfer from one family member to another?
That's a very good guess. It's pretty close to that. I talked with the gentleman who runs this establishment. I believe his name is Vivek Patel, and I hope I'm not slaughtering that. What he told me was that they had a partnership, which was the Shira Varatma LLC partnership. One of the partners, I guess, wanted out, so they're transferring the liquor license from this partnership to another partnership, where he would still be the manager. And so basically, the reason for this is one person is dropping out and they're transferring it to a new partnership. So I had a nice conversation with him. I also had an opportunity to talk with Chief Foster today. I contacted him to make sure that, there were no issues or problems with this establishment, and he indicated to me that they've been a very good business for the city and they've never had problems with them. So I'd also given to the clerk some information with regard to the LLCs to attach for everyone, and you'll see the same person is the manager, the statutory agent, which is Vivek Patel. So under the circumstances, I think that this is something that we probably would not need to object to, and it can just be left to go through in the ordinary course of business. I also had an opportunity to talk with Councilman Orcutt. That's his ward, and he indicated to me that he had some knowledge of the establishment, and he may also wish to give his thoughts on this particular transfer.
Okay, so I'm going to assume that the ownership of the building remains the same, it's just the license that's going to be,
Correct.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Anyone else? Mr. Orcutt?
Yes, I spoke with the manager over there. I think some of us do know him personally. It's a very good establishment, and basically all they're doing is transferring from one corporation to another. Simple as that.
Thank you. Mr. Scott, did you have some? No.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Salvatore.
if there's no other questions, I'd like to make a motion this was discussed.
Support.
Motion on the floor that this was discussed, properly supported. Questions on the motion? Discussion? Seeing none. Michelle, please call the roll.
Salvatore,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Bergio,
Yes.
Orcutt,
Yes.
Stem,
Yes.
Mancini,
Yes.
Poindexter,
Yes.
motion carried.
Motion that this has been discussed is carried. Item number 2, a resolution granting an amendment to the conditional use permit to construct and maintain a two-family dwelling at 6091 Smith Road, located in the U1 A5 zone, and declaring an emergency. This was approved at the Planning Commission meeting September 11th, 2017, based on the revised TOPO submitted by the applicant 12/6/17 and the engineer's comments dated 12/12/17. In attendance that day were Erica Bogdan, 4450 Sir Richard Avenue, North Royalton. Note is resolution number 24-2017, adopted on October 3rd, 2017, is included in the packet for reference purposes per Council President Vecchio. Ms. Bogdan, if you'd like to come to the podium, if you would, state your name and your address for the record.
Erica Bogdan, 4450 Sir Richard Avenue.
4451 Sir Richard. Rich Bogdan.
Thank you, Mr. Bogdan. Council, do you have any questions for Mr. or Ms. Bogdan? Mr. Mancini?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through the chair. Mr. Bogdan, has there been any changes, anything since you last appeared before council on this? Anything that you'd like to discuss with us?
No, it's the same, that just what they want to do, that we give them the first print, which what we wanted to do, and I guess the city engineer says no, otherwise it's too much concrete though, and we went to the first drawing, just the way we had it originally,
With the one driveway.
and one driveway, yes.
Okay, and just the one driveway?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe one other thing I have here, if this were to be okayed, when would you be possibly starting on this?
As soon as I get the permits.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mancini. Anyone else? Questions from Mr. or Ms. Bogdan? No other questions. Thank you. Gentlemen, I'll need an action on this.
I'm ready to move it to the next council agenda. That's what we need to do. I'll make
So are you
I'll
making
make
a
that
motion to
motion.
move
I'll support that.
February 6th meeting? Or
Yes,
Yeah, I'll support that.
yes, February, yep, that's when it would be, February 6th.
Motion to put this on the February 6th council agenda. Properly supported.
Yes.
Any questions on the motion? Discussion? Seeing none. Michelle, please call the roll.
Mancini,
Yes.
Poindexter,
Yes.
Salvatore,
Yes.
Stem,
Yes.
Orcutt,
Yes.
Bergio,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Motion to put it on the February 6, 2018 council agenda has been approved. You guys moved on to the next round. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 3, a resolution granting conditional use permit to maintain a two-family dwelling at 5774 Smith Road, located in the U5A zone, and declaring an emergency per Council President Vecchio. Mr. Mancini?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure my colleague in Ward 3, Mr. Orcutt, would like to discuss this, but I've talked to this resident numerous times, and he's done everything there is to do to go along with the planning commission, with the building department, again, to make this a 2-unit. It's one of the older homes, I would believe, in the city of Brook Park. I got to think in some of the historical pictures that Mr. Huffsey had, sometimes you see that house. You don't even see Brookgate, you see that house sitting alone with, I believe there's one other over there that, I think that was a double unit for the Murphys. And the Murphys lived there a long time, and it's an older home, and he's put a lot of work into it. He's done a lot. He's come up to everything, every code that we have to have approved. He's done that. He's worked very hard. He chooses to stay here with a big family in Brook Park. That's what we're looking for. And, again, he's hit all the specs we needed to do this. obviously, if I'm not mistaken, it's a conditional use permit, so where can we go wrong? That's my opinion on it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mancini. Mr. Bergio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think our building commissioner answered the questions that we had about some of the changes that were made. I believe that they complied with those changes.
Great,
That's
thank
all I
you.
have, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Orcutt. Wow. All right, deferring over to the Law Director. Madam Law Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to indicate after review that there is a little bit of discrepancy in the way the ordinance is drawn versus the Planning Commission. And it appears that when the ordinance was drawn, the language from the Planning Commission which said, which will revert back to a single-family use once the original family members, parentheses, tenants, vacate the premises, that was not included into the ordinance when it was drafted, and probably should be inserted into section 1 at the end of the paragraph.
Thank you. So just to recap, we need to add a conditional use permit that it reverts back to single family upon transfer.
Two-family?
It would revert back to the single family once the original family members vacate the premises.
Thank you for clarifying. Mr. Orcutt.
Yes, I've been following this very closely. I've spoke with the homeowner a few times, and unfortunately, he has done everything right, and I think he's gotten overlooked because there was big change on our planning commission. He does need to meet this deadline, and he has done everything that he possibly could prior to. We did have an oversight, and the city did have an oversight, and we didn't get him on the planning commission as he needed. And one of the conditions were, and just so it catch everybody up, everybody doesn't understand this, is that this conditional permit is for family members, for the grandparents to come there, and without giving out all the information, it's there for care. So I think this young man's done everything that he needed to do. He's just purchased the property about a year ago. He's fixed it up, and all he's asking for is this conditional permit for the grandparents to move in. And as soon as they move out, it's just for them to go back to a single-family dwelling. And that's what was spoke at the Planning Commission, and I really think this is something that we should move forward and place on tonight's special council meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Orcutt. Mr. Scott.
Yeah, through the chair to the law director. Mr. Director, do you think we should just add a letter E to that with that wording on there and be done with it?
Through the chair to Councilman Scott, that would be one way of doing it. I thought perhaps to insert it in section 1, but there is another way of, that would be an additional way of amending it.
But the wording should be included in here before we proceed, correct?
Correct, yes. I would say that probably was the Planning Commission's intent, and it should be inserted in.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Madam Law Director. Gentlemen, I believe that we can make a motion to amend here on the floor for that also. Mr. Salvatore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through the chair to the law director. Making that amendment into section 1 and reverting back to single-family dwelling, having that in the ordinance. Will that be able to accommodate what we're trying to accomplish tonight with what Mr. Orcutt's trying to assist one of his residents, and if they move out, will that clause automatically take effect?
Yes, I believe it will.
Okay, so that'll satisfy all of the needs and the wants of being able to do this.
Yes, I believe it would.
Okay, if you bear with me, because I've lost part of my voice there. I think I left it in the back room, but could you recite that amendment, how it should read, so that we can add it to, and I'll make that amendment to add it to section 1?
Certainly, it would say, which will revert back to a single-family use once the original family members vacate the premises.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and Madam Law Director, I'm sorry. I'd like to make that motion.
I'll support that.
Councilman Poindexter.
Yeah, I'd like to pose a question to Mr. Orcutt. He knows quite a bit about this project. What's preventing them from just moving their grandparents into the single-family dwelling? Maybe have the sides separated. I don't know very much about this project. Maybe you can answer that. Like, why can't they just move his grandparents in to the single-family dwelling without, going through the whole two-family dwelling?
Through the chairman to Councilman Poindexter, that's a great question. That has been brought up, and it has to do with some of the finances for the family and what they bring in. So I believe the family will be moving here from out of state, and to keep some of the funding that they do have, they do need to have a separate address.
Thank you, Mr. Poindexter. Motion on the floor to amend, properly seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Michelle, please call the roll.
Salvatore,
Yes.
Mancini,
Yes.
Poindexter,
Yes.
Stem,
Yes.
Orcutt,
Yes.
Bergio,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Motion to amend section 1 is approved.
Motion to place on tonight's council agenda.
Support.
Motion to place on tonight's council agenda properly supported. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Michelle, please call the roll.
Salvatore,
Yes.
Mancini,
Yes.
Poindexter,
Yes.
Stem,
Yes.
Orcutt,
Yes.
Bergio,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Motion is approved to move to tonight's special council agenda following this meeting. We'll have resolution number 4-2018 assigned to this. Moving on to number 4, appointments of council clerk and any such employees as council may deem necessary per Council President Astorino, or Vecchio.
Make a motion for a 5-minute recess.
Support that.
I just had to throw it out there just for a little levity, gentlemen. Floor is open for discussion. Mr. Orcutt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A quick question. I didn't get to see it, but I wanted to ask you about the timeline on the ad that was in the paper for the resumes. What day does that end?
So that is the last day of the month, which it will run till the 31st. So it runs on Sundays in the actual newspaper and online through the other days, including those same Sundays.
Another question for you. This is probably something that we need to keep open to see the rest of these resumes that do come through till the end of the month. If an ad had ran in the paper and people do have to the end of the month and it's only the 23rd, I would think that we would have to allow the people at least till the end of the month to get those resumes in.
I would think that we would extend the resume period. You're going to have a couple day leeway, either forward or back of the final day, for receipt of those before review.
The only thing that I can see that we can extend right now is and we extended the council clerk's pay and her time in until the end of the month. And now I found out later, and I do apologize, that's something that I found out later, that it's to the end of the month, so it didn't really coincide. If we're going to be taking these resumes in, I believe it's something at this time that it would be responsible of us to at least extend Mrs. Blazak to a later date and not by a month. We've got to not do that to her. I believe that we need to extend this at least a few months, possibly to the end of April, where we can take these resumes in, sort through them, give the people a fair chance that did apply for this position, and go from there. So we can sort through them, meet with each other and have an executive session and sort through them.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Salvatore.
is that a form of a motion?
I would like to make a motion then to extend Michelle through the end of April.
I'll support that.
Are we still under discussion?
Still under discussion. Mr. Mancini?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know, I figure maybe a lot of times when, so far I've been up here in my past 4 years, we got a great council clerk. And I think she crosses a lot of our Ts, dots a lot of our Is. She's done a super job for me. I don't use her every day. Like a lot of us, she's been through a lot the last 2 years. But as my time being on here, I'm always pretty good with a 6 month. Again, I'll leave it to my colleagues. If April's where you want to go, I'm fine with that. But I wouldn't mind going the end of June, but if April's the date, that's fine. But I always figure a 6 month would be pretty good too, so.
Mr. Salvatore?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I kind of agree with Councilman Orcutt. I think April 30th puts our feet to the fire. It makes us get moving on this and not sit back and wait 6 months and then nothing happens and we have another issue. I think Michelle deserves the opportunity to find out her future, and I think council has an obligation because of the ad that went in the paper to at least screen the applications of the people that took the time to put their resumes forward. And I don't really want to wait around an extra couple of months. I'd like to put our feet to the fire and get this moving and come to some conclusion by the end of April. And I think that Mr. Orcutt gave it a lot of thought on the dates, and I agree that we should be able to accomplish it by then. So that's my second to his motion, still stands. Excuse me, still stands. Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Mancini?
Again, I'm fine with that. I'll definitely go with the majority. I mean, I'm not up here for any battles, but on that, I mean, we'll have a lot on our plate. New council, new administration. We'll have other things arising besides trying to pick assistant clerk or what we plan on doing here. I also think that, you know, we've already had with a couple of the directors. We're seeing how that's going. Hopefully, that's going to end real soon, and we'll go on to our next issue that we have. But I just wanted to state that. I'm fine with the majority, though, absolutely. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Orcutt?
I think you've made some great through the chair to Councilman Mancini. I think you've made some great points on this. I did put some thought in it. It's something that was big. I do have to say this too, and I want this to be a formal thank you. I think that Michelle's done nothing but a professional job this whole time. It's made my transition into this position very easy with everything that she's done. The reason that I came up with the extensions is only because there was a timeline on those resumes. And we have to think about the candidates that are putting their applications in. We can't forget about them. I have a folder at home with, I don't even know how many are in there. There's probably 15 in there right now. So I think it's time for us to at least 3-4 months is good. And I like how Councilman Salvatore put it. You know, it puts our feet to the fire. We're getting moving, and I think people sense that about this council. There's a new standard in town, and we do want to get moving with it. I think 6 months would be a little too long, but I think just extending it possibly 3 more months is just the right amount of time for us to sort through the resumes that we take in and to move forward and get going. So I would like to make that motion if discussion's over to extend our council clerk, our current council clerk's pay until the end of April.
All right, gentlemen, if I may interject, so the end of April, our last meeting for that month would be, based upon council meetings, would be the 17th. I believe we'd have to go to May 1st. So that takes it all the way through the end of April, true. I don't know what that, I'm guessing somewhere in the 90-day area, right? So May 1st would probably have to be the next discussion.
And the last meeting before that was April 17th?
Yes.
Yeah.
I apologize, I don't have that in front of me. I'd like to make the motion for April 17th. I think that's plenty of time for us to receive resumes by the end of January and to move forward.
We initially have a motion on the floor.
Mr. Chairman, you're actually moving the date up?
No, I was actually looking, if we were going to the end of the month, at the end of the month, we don't have an end of April date unless we're going to have a special meeting. So
Well,
the
I think-
the first meeting of May would actually constitute the end of the month.
I think the April 30th date works because that's our deadline. That means we have to get it done before then. So we'll be working on it and having some answers by the middle of April. Because there's people that, if you are going to consider someone else, and maybe we're not, maybe we already have the best candidate up here now. But the people have to give their 2 weeks' notice. They have to do their professional courtesy to the companies that they may be working for. So I would like to leave it at the same date that Mr. Orcutt has suggested and force us to move a little quicker.
All right, so the initial motion was to the end of April. We may want to take an action on that, gentlemen.
That was a motion on the floor, was properly seconded.
Right. The second, as we're discussing, though, we've actually put a confirmed date, so you guys can take an action and leave the first motion to the end of April, or you can put it with a date.
In order to put another date, you'd have to withdraw the motion. We have a motion
Correct.
on the floor, properly seconded.
I think we just stay with the original motion to the end of April.
Motion on the floor till the end of April, properly seconded. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, Michelle, please call the roll.
Orcutt,
Yes.
Bergeron,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Salvatore,
Yes.
Poindexter,
Yes.
Mancini,
Yes.
Stem,
Yes.
motion carried.
Motion to put this to the end of April is carried. Item number 5, interim service director. Oh, sorry.
Under item 4, this is also any such employees council may deem necessary. Are we going to discuss the assistant clerk at all, or?
That's up to council. What council would like to discuss on it?
Eddie's got his hand up first.
Mr. Orcutt?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I received in my inbox a letter. It was addressed to you, but it was from our assistant clerk. I was just wondering, whatever came out of this? What happened with that? I know that I had heard that possibly she was out on leave.
The discussion has been there that she was out on leave. We've been chasing a paper trail on it, so trying to see if there's been any paperwork in it, and we haven't found any. So I've been kind of on the phone for the last couple days chasing around. I've spoken to the law director, Debbie Alamo, our HR director, and back and forth, trying to get a full synopsis of this. It appears that medical leave was taken at the end of November, and without a paperwork trail, so I didn't have a date there to be able to say from the council office.
What paper trail are we looking for the proper notice of her leave?
Yeah, it would be required that notice be sent to the Human Resources Department of a person being out on leave, and currently we don't have anything.
Okay, and the reason why I bring this up, and it did have, on item number 4 here, all employees that may deem necessary. So I definitely don't want to overlook herself, especially if our assistant was on medical leave and now she's in limbo. You know, these motions I've been making this month are to protect what's going on for the city, do the right thing for the city. And I read this letter, and I have a lot of questions about that stuff. So what you're saying today is there is no paperwork whatsoever for her. There's nothing saying that she was on medical leave.
Nothing that has been found through the HR department.
It's been under my understanding since day one, since I came in, had orientation with our council clerk. We had a great meeting. That came up, from my understanding, she was on medical leave, and now she's in limbo. Is this something that, what are we supposed to do for her at this time right now?
I think at this moment, we probably want to defer this over to the law director and get an opinion as to where this should be headed. Madam Law Director?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, obviously, we're looking for that trail, trying to trace down some paperwork and facts. And at this point in time, probably the best thing would be for council to determine not to make that appointment either interim or permanent with regard to the assistant clerk.
Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Salvatore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with the law director. I had an opportunity when I received the letter from our assistant clerk. There certainly seemed to be a lot of confusion as to was there any paperwork filed for a medical leave. There was another incident that was very similar to this one, and what procedure was followed on that seems to be different than the policy that may be in the handbook. And so I think we, to be fair, to still go ahead and let the law director proceed and to come up with the right answers before we move forward on filling that spot, or so I would make a motion that we just leave that spot alone for right now. Thank you.
Mr. Mancini.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I concur. I believe we need answers. I believe our council president needs answers to move ahead on this. And obviously, our assistant clerk of council needs some type of little resolution on this, know where she stands. But, you know, in order to get there, and I believe my colleagues said it, the first council meeting, they said it today, that, you know, kind of a new day here. We want to do things right. We're going to do them proper. We're not going to rush. And, you know, we'd like to get her some answers. So, again, I agree with my colleagues. So, thank you.
Mr. Orcutt.
Yes, just to clarify and a little synopsis, the paperwork that we're looking for, what paperwork are we looking for? Just from the department head to HR stating that she was on medical leave? And the reason why I'm asking these questions is I just need clarification. As we look, I have to look after an employee that wrote a letter. I want to know what type of letter are we looking for? Is it a department head to human resources?
Yes,
Letter
it would
that's
be-
missing?
It would be a department head to human resources. Council obviously being a little bit different, not quote-unquote considered a department. Council Rule 27 states that the council president is the office administrator, and the office administrator is responsible for those papers and for that action. And that's the action that we're trying to research and see where it's at. Currently, it's leading to a dead end.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that we do things right. I'm glad that the law director had given us an opinion on this, but we have to consider, you know, doing this quickly, because I read that letter, and we have somebody sitting in limbo. And the way I read the policy handbook and the way I read the rules, it's in black and white, and it's very simple to me. The department head or designee is supposed to write a letter. So it's a very simple thing. We're looking for a letter from our department head there, and we have to do that as soon as possible so that we can take care of our assistant council clerk.
Correct.
I think we've had enough time on this. And she's been on leave for, I believe, since the end of November, and it's now going into the end of January, and we're still in limbo. So, and I know that you don't have anything to do with that, but I think we have to put some serious urgency on this.
I would agree. Anyone else? Mr. Bergio.
Mr. Chairman, what is the motion? There's a motion on the floor right now.
Motion on the floor is to not fill the position of the assistant clerk at this time.
I support it.
Support.
Motion on the floor, properly supported. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none. Michelle, please call the roll.
Salvatore?
Yes.
Scott?
Yes.
Bergio?
Yes.
Orcutt?
Yes.
Stem?
Yes.
Mancini?
Yes.
Poindexter?
Yes.
Motion to not fill the position of assistant council clerk at this time has been approved. Are there any other questions underneath of that one with anything else, gentlemen? Seeing none, I'm going to move on. Under discussion, still under item 4, number 5, interim service director John Pensis, Mayor Gamella per President Vecchio.
Thank you, Mr. President. Council, unfortunately, Mr. Pensis has decided he's going to pull his interim status. He thanked me very much for bringing him up. He thanked you for your consideration. But at this time, after talking with his family, he's decided he does not want the position. So at this point, what I'll do, I'm looking at resumes right now. I'll bring you over some resumes probably by the end of the week to look over, and hopefully we can put it on the February 6th council meeting after discussion at the February 6th caucus meeting. And finally, I've had the clerk pass out today the resume of Brian Blaney for safety director. I will be withdrawing Mr. Adams' name, and I'd appreciate if you consider Mr. Blaney, you have the resume in front of you. And again, if we could put that on the February 6th caucus, talk about the council, and let's move on with the city business. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Mancini, please make it short and sweet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will. Mr. Mayor, I'm a little disappointed, but I understand Mr. Pence's situation. He was a quality guy. He was a great pick. I think you hit a home run on that one, and I hope the person you choose after this, and I'm sure there's some good candidates, follows, and we're in the same spot with a quality candidate as Mr. Pence's. So that was a good choice, though. Thank you. That's all I
Thank you,
have to say.
Councilman, and I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Mancini. Mr. Scott.
Through the chair to the mayor. Sir, do we have any other appointments or anything that's need to be announced tonight?
No, not at this time.
Through the chair.
Go ahead.
January, you were stated that January 16th, you were going to make an announcement as to the Human Resources Director and the Economic Development Director. Have you made a decision? Is the Human Resources the person that's listed on the?
Well, I thought I'd have a service director and a safety director by now, but I don't. And I'm trying to be patient. I want to work with this council. Debbie Delamo is a human resources coordinator, and the economic development director right now. That situation is currently fluid, depending on what happens with the safety director and the service director. If you'd like to ask me a direct question, I'd be happy to answer it.
I just asked if Debbie Lamo is your Human Resources.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And do you know what her pay is by chance?
I'm sorry?
Do you know what her pay is by chance?
She started at the very minimum.
Okay. No, I'm just.
Yeah, she started at the very minimum. I try to start all my directors and commissioners at the very minimum. The only exception to that rule was Mark Elliott, because of his outstanding resume, and we've got a big job over there at the rec center. I think you would all agree. And I need a person over there, and I was very glad when Mark decided and the council confirmed them, because again, that rec center project, wow, that's enormous. And what I will be doing is bringing the contractor in, probably in a week or so, to bring council up to speed on what's going on. You were at the last meeting that we had. It was a very fruitful meeting. And I want council to see what's going on so everybody's on the same page with the recreation center. I think everybody knows my position on the pool. I would like to reopen the pool. We have that company looking at that. But again, whatever decision is made is going to be made collectively.
Through the chair to the mayor.
Continue.
Sorry, I got a couple.
No, go ahead.
So you're on our citywide extension listing here. We got Economic Development Director as Jim Mastrino, so that isn't true?
No.
Okay. Next question is, this is a little touchy. Mr. Asperino's been in the office now since the 1st of January. What's he doing, if I may ask?
Well, I was considering making him Economic Development Director, quite frankly, and I wanted to make the position part-time. But after looking at everything, boy, there's a lot entailed in that position, economic development, and I don't think I can make that position part-time and do the city justice. So at this point, Mr. Astorino has been over there working, and we'll just see where that goes.
So, back to the mayor again.
Sure.
We have no position for him, he's just, because here's my point, is he,
Go ahead.
is he on payroll? Do you know if he's?
Yes.
He is on payroll?
Yes, yes. He was doing the work of the Economic Development Director, but I've had a talk with Mr. Astrino. He will not be the Economic Development Director.
Through the chair to, again, through the chair to Mr.
Sure,
Sandra.
go ahead.
Greg, have you received any paperwork for Mr. Estorino as of today?
No.
Okay, so here, I'm not trying to be whatever. So if he hasn't received any paperwork, what are we paying Mr. Estorino, since we have nothing on that?
Well, again, I wanted to make it part-time, so it would have been on a part-time salary of $49,000, but I would need council's approval for that. And again, after looking at the Economic Development Director's job, initially my intention was to make that part-time. It can't be done. It's got to be a full-time position.
So Mr. Estorino right now is considered what, a volunteer, or?
Well, I wouldn't quite consider him a volunteer, but let's just put it this way. He is not going to be the Economic Development Director.
Again, back to my original question, I'm not going to be argumentative.
Okay.
What's he doing right now?
He was the Economic Development Director. That's initially why I brought him in, to do that part-time. Due to circumstances, he's not going to be the Economic Development Director because I made a decision to make that full-time.
Okay. So again, what is he doing in there right now? I mean, what is his
Again,
official
I'll say it once more. I had initially going to use him as the Economic Development Director on a part-time basis. I can't use an Economic Development Director on a part-time basis because I've determined it's a full-time job.
Okay. Through the chair to the law director, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Counsel,
I'm not being argumentative.
no, I understand.
I gotta
And-
find
and-
out what-
And one quick aside, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I've been very patient with you gentlemen. I hope you be patient with me because I do
am.
want to work with you.
I want to work, we met, and you know what I told you. I want to be a yes, I've been called a yes man. And if being a yes man means getting along with the mayor, I told you I'm more than willing to be your yes man. You know what I'm saying? I want things to move forward. Through the chair to law director, please. Madam Law Director, is there any legal ramifications or anything that could happen with the situation that's going on right now due to the fact that this person's been working since January 1st without any paperwork, without anything being submitted to our finance director?
Through the chair to Councilman Scott, there are some issues. One of the things that I did was to reach out to our insurance carrier, determine whether or not there would be any protection for any claims, and they'd indicated to me that volunteers acting within the scope of their authorized duties are considered insured under the policy for both general liability and public officials' liability. I think this is a situation that has been somewhat fluid, and certainly your questions are appropriate. If it appears that he is going to continue to remain pending another person being appointed to that position, then it may be that we need to sit down and look at some workers' comp issues, probably some confidentiality issues, and perhaps some other items. I don't know what Mayor Gamella's intentions are at this point, but yes, there is a possibility that there could be legal issues, but one of the issues will not be whether or not he is an insured under our policy. That I have determined that there would be coverage for that. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, no, that's all. Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
Councilman. I appreciate your patience on the matter.
I appreciate your patience with me.
Mr. Scott, thank you. I just happened to catch something from the law director I'd like to ask on that. Carol, you stated that there could possibly be an insurance issue if volunteers working under their job description. If they're working under their job description, there wouldn't be an issue.
Mr. Chairman, he would be covered. There would be coverage if he were a volunteer acting within the scope of his authorized duties. Now, of course, when I say the situation is fluid, we probably would have to determine what his authorized duties would be. And depending on the situation, we would need to make sure that, you know, there's some element of confidentiality. And depending on where things finally end up, if someone's an employee, then of course they're covered under workers' comp. If they're not an employee and they're a volunteer instead, that might be a problem.
Okay, so they're,
So we would have to determine his status with some degree of accuracy, and then see what problems may flow from that status, and then determine how to resolve those problems.
okay, so it sounds to me as if a description of duties would have to be laid out in order to say whether the coverage would be there or not, in that case?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stem?
You can disregard, thank you.
Mr. Salvatore?
Thanks again, Mr. Chairman. Through the chair of the mayor, just so I understand this, you wanted to appoint Jim Chesterino as your Director of Economic Development. That was going to be,
Go ahead, Councilman, I'm sorry.
that was going to be originally converted to a part-time position, and you've now determined that the importance of that position should be more full-time. But it also, unless I misunderstood, I heard somebody say, or maybe Councilman Scott said, or you said that Jim is on the payroll, so he's getting paid. Is that correct or not correct?
Well, that would be correct, Rick. Again, I intended to make that a part-time position. It did not work out. It will not work out after looking at what the duties entail. I need a full-time person there, so I will appoint a full-time person there.
Would it be safe to assume then that he is our Economic Development Director until duly appointed by someone, that you pick someone else?
Yes.
So he is our Director of Economic Development temporarily?
Well, let me say this. There was an understanding on a part-time position. That position is no longer there. It's full-time. So there will be someone else named.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Salvatore. Mr. Scott?
I'm sorry, through the chair to the mayor again. Does Mr. Estrino have access to city files and whatnot?
In the Economic Development Office, yes, sir.
I got issues with that. Has he been appointed any type of a department head or whatever? I've got an issue. I feel since we have no paperwork through Mr. Single as to how to pay whatnot and whatnot. I just got a bad taste in my mouth that he is basically a resident holding an office in the city hall. That's just the way I feel. I hope I'm not right with that, but I just got a bad feeling on that. I don't know if you agree with me. I don't know if you disagree with me, but I have a feeling since he does not have any paperwork submitted, I don't think he's been paid anything. He has full reign to economic development records, files. I would have to consider him a resident since he hasn't been appointed anything, hasn't been paid anything. I just got good feelings on that, but I don't know how you take it. It's
Well, again, he was the part-time Economic Development Director. That position is no longer there. Correct. So we'll be filling that position in a full-time basis with someone else very, very shortly.
okay.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Mr. Orcutt?
I'm a bit confused. I think my colleague's asking very good questions, but with the questions that were asked, I'm just kind of going to wrap this up and taking everything. He's being paid. He doesn't have a title. Our finance director says he's not on the books, and our law director says that that could be a liability. That's what I just heard in the last 5 minutes. I'm confused. Is it a liability? Are we paying him? Are we not paying him? Those are the questions I have. I heard all three of those things just now in this discussion. Something isn't adding up here. And
I don't know.
Mayor, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just taking this information in, and it's just a question.
Well, I think, I'll say it again, Councilman. Initially, I was going to make the Economic Development Director a part-time job. I had intended to fill Mr. Astorino. However, I've decided I need a full-time Economic Development Director, and it will not be Mr. Astorino. But for the past 23 days, he has been acting as the Economic Development Director. So that should, I hope that answers the question. The reason the paperwork isn't in, the ordinance claims it's full-time. So to make that change, I'd have to bring it over here to council and make it a part-time Economic Development Director. I'd have to have council change it. And I think with the feelings of the gentleman, that would never happen. So I've got to go a different way. So again, I'm asking you to be patient with me like I am with this council. Let me work this thing through. I've had discussions with the law director on it, and it'll be okay.
Oh, okay, I appreciate that, and Mayor, I do agree with you. I do feel that economic development is a full-time position. I mean, that's our bread and butter. That's how we're bringing our revenue in. So that, I agree with you 100%. But still, do we have that liability with him being in our municipal buildings? I know the law director said we do need to have that conversation, so maybe that was already answered. But I just want to formally bring that up. That's what I took in right now, that he may be in there and that may be a liability for insurance and workman's comp.
Thank you, Mr. Orcutt. Mr. Stem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through the chair to the law director. So it's just a question. Volunteers for the city don't have permission to look at city files, and their access controls for where they're volunteering, like the rec center or city hall, they don't have access everywhere. Is that correct?
I would say, through the chair to Councilman Stem, yeah, essentially that is correct. Now, there are certain policies in our manual, our policy manual, that talk about records and different things, and if you're an employee, you have to follow those policies, and that gives the city some protection and outline for employees as to how to act and what to do in certain situations. If you're a volunteer, then you may not have signed and agreed to be bound by the terms of that policy manual, so that's a problem. And certainly it's a problem with regard to looking at documents that have some element of confidentiality to them. Sure. And so yes, that would be a concern, and that would have to be something that would be worked out under the situation that we have at hand. By the same token, if you're not an employee, you may not be covered under workers' compensation. There may be other issues involved, and certainly I think the city has many volunteers. Let's take something very, very simple. Let's say you're a coach for a basketball team, and so you're volunteering, and so as long as you're acting with the scope of your authorized duties, coaching that team, if something happened from a general liability or a public official's liability standpoint, you would have coverage under the city's insurance policy. But these other issues need to be determined and resolved. And I think that's something that certainly myself and perhaps Mr. Single will work on. But depending on where this is going, all of these issues will have to be addressed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stem. Mr. Poindexter.
Thank you, Council President. Through the chair to the mayor, has Mr. Astorino received any pay to this point?
No. No, but he will be entitled to pay. He has done the job as the assistant director there for economic development. And so, yes, he will be entitled to some pay coming up. But again, he will not be the full-time economic development director.
And one more, through the chair to the law director, are there any paid volunteers with the city? Does paying them or entitling them to pay make him an employee instead of a volunteer?
I'm unaware of any paid volunteers. That may perhaps be a question for Mr. Single. It seems to me that either you're hired as an employee, you fill out the employment packet, you provide the information necessary, that's processed, and it goes over to the finance department, and then at that point, you're on the books and you're an employee. Conversely, if you're a volunteer, I think depending on the type of volunteering, they also have procedures for that. But they're two quite different things. I don't imagine that if you're a volunteer, you would be paid for anything. But I'll defer that question to Mr. Single.
Go ahead, Mr. Single.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Through the chair to Councilman Poindexter, if you're a volunteer, you don't get paid.
Thank you.
So if it is determined that he is an employee, then there's no issue with him having access to files and things of that nature?
If he were an employee, if he were filling the position of full-time economic development director, then all of the proper paperwork would be processed. He would have acknowledged that he read and had an opportunity to read the policy manual, and he would be bound by the terms that all employees are bound by. You would not have an issue with regard to workers' comp or some of the other issues, and in all likelihood, as an employee, there would not be a confidentiality issue that would exist with regard to some of the documents that he would see. Conversely, if he were not an employee, if he did not fill out those papers in the ordinary course, then there may be some issues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Poindexter. Mr. Mancini.
I knew you were coming my way. Through the chair to the mayor. Mayor, will he be there tomorrow?
I'm sorry?
Will Mr. Astorino be there tomorrow?
Yes, he will be there tomorrow.
Okay. Well, I'll say this, and I know I've spoken to you before on this, and being on the little campaign trail there, that I believe that the community development director should be a very, very high-powered position in our city right now, being in the situation that this city's in now and the point of our career. We need business here, we need grants, we need somebody with a lot of energy to go find them. Somebody's gonna probably have to put a lot more work than even maybe full-time, and as out there, and I hear, there's probably maybe one, maybe two, that could be probably part-time. And me personally, I think safety possibly could be one. That's me saying. Going on that, the position to be filled there for that community development should be, and you made some good choices. Mr. D'Amico, Mr. Elliott, I thought Mr. Pensis was a good choice, but unfortunately he chose not to take it. I think it's got to be somebody of that caliber to take that position. It's a big position for our city, very big position, so that's how I feel on that position. So I just wanted to get my, and I thank the chairman for recognizing me on that too, so I wanted to get that out, but thank you, that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mancini. Mr. Bergio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mayor, I do agree with you that it needs to be a full-time job. I think there's plenty to do, and I think not filling that position, and it's going to take a while, I assume that we're kind of stagnating as a city, so we really need to have that person as a full-time economic director. And my question was going to be, have you consulted with our law director? But you said you have, so I think we need to kind of get this matter to come to a close so we can move on, and looking forward to that happening. So I'm glad that the law director is looking into it, so there's no legal ramifications for the city too. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bergio. Anyone else? I have a question for the mayor, if council would allow me. Mayor, so you stated that during this time he's been in a position of Economic Development Director. Does that mean that for this period he'll be paid a salary based upon the salaried amount for the Economic Development Director, either in the low or the high, or do you have something else that you're determining?
He will be paid $49,000 based on that. So in other words, it will be off that $49,000 at 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever it's been.
Okay, so prorated on the,
Yes,
based
sir.
upon the 49,000.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Salvatore?
I guess my only concern is paying off of a $49,000 salary base that doesn't appear in the ordinance. I think they could pay him from the bottom, the low point, but I don't think you can go below the low point.
Rick, your point's well taken, and I'll have the auditor look at it. I'm going to meet with the auditor later in the week, and we'll talk about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, gentlemen. Any other discussion on this? Seeing none.
Motion that was discussed.
Support.
Motion on the floor that was discussed, properly supported. Discussion on the motion? Yes. Seeing none, Michelle, please call the roll.
Salvatore?
Yes.
Scott?
Yes.
Bergio?
Yes.
Orcutt?
Yes.
Stem?
Yes.
Mancini?
Yes.
Poindexter?
Yes.
Motion as this was discussed is passed. Moving on to item number 6, proposed citywide projects. Councilman Salvatore per Council President Vecchio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to get this on the agenda. I wanted to get an early start while winter's still here, start talking about some projects that we may consider as soon as the construction season begins. I'd like to make a few suggestions, some things that we may be able to do in-house. I was hoping our engineer would be here today because he might be able to answer some questions that I had. But these are some projects that over the years we've talked about. I thought there were some great ideas. In fact, some of them, most of them were my ideas. And we just never got it off the ground. And just evidenced by this few short weeks of working with this council, I think this council is very aggressive and wants to make some improvements to our community. And I tell you some of the reasons why I want to do some of the things that I'm going to suggest. You know, when people drive through your town, and we all talk about property values, we all say, well, Brook Park is on the rise, and it is. But the key is not just having it on the rise, is to maintain it, to maintain the property values and to keep them there. And one of the ways to do that is to, when people drive through the town, they have their relatives come over or their friends visit, and they see positive things happening in the community. They say, holy cow, this Brook Park is way ahead of where I'm from. I think I might want to look at houses over here. And I think that's some of the things that this group here, I think they're headed in that direction. I've had many talks over the last several weeks with Councilman Orcutt, and I'm impressed with his attitude towards some of the things that we talked about in this very topic. Carl's been around for a long time, so he's been engaged in some of these conversations with us for a long time. Rich, very excited. I'm very impressed with this side of the room, except for Jimmy Mancini, because he talks too much, but other than that, I'm only kidding, Jimmy. I mean, I think this is a council, and hopefully this is an administration that says, you know, let's don't just talk about it. Let's really make Brook Park what it once was and what it can be again. And now I'll talk about a couple of projects. One of them was the intersection of Snow Road and 71. It's the first thing people see and the last thing they see when they come into Brook Park from the freeway. And there's no reason why we can't have an outstanding, very attractive intersection with red brick, planters, greenery that actually grows, and we're not looking at dead trees, proper lighting, state-of-the-art lighting. And I personally don't think that that's going to break the bank. But I certainly think it's going to create a tremendous image of people traveling in and out of Brook Park. I always wanted to put the word in brick on the side of 71 as you drove through Brook Park, and you look to your right or to your left, and you'll see the word Brook Park, Ohio, however you want to do it. Way before Strongsville did it, I wanted to do it back in I think it was 1998 or 99. Strongsville beat us to it, and it's really, if you ever get out towards Strongsville, you're coming off the freeway there on the 82, and you'll see it. I'm not talking about building something that elaborate, but something that classy, something that looks sharp, and it shows off our name, Brook Park. The other thing that we talked about, and I know we can do this in-house, we talked about that resolution for John Glenn, and council decided to put it back in committee, and I'm glad we did, because all we're really doing is just giving a piece of paper to who? Who's just gonna read something and it's gonna end up in the back room? I think we should go one step farther, and I think we should build a little walkway. The length of the walkway is undetermined at this time, because I don't know how many plaques or how many headstones we're gonna put up in there, but I would like to start with Mr. Glenn. I think that's a perfect one to start with. And have this walkway built, again, with a nice brick walkway, a pedestal and a plaque honoring him, maybe even taking the exact whereases right off the resolution and reprinting them and putting them right on to that plaque. And that could be the kickoff, and we could maybe go into our junior high school or our high school or even our elementary school, which I'd probably prefer doing that, and name that parkway. And I thought of, because Glenn would be the first one, and talk about Glenway. Of course, we already have a Glenway. The other one would be the Spaceway, because he came from as an astronaut. So, I mean, those are just a couple suggestions. But I think these are simple projects. I think there's something that we can all hang on to and say, you know, let's get pricing on this, and then let's do it. Let's start making Brook Park beautiful. I mean, I had a debate one time with somebody. I said, why do we always have to build ugly? Why can't we build something that looks good? Classic example, and I keep referring to Eddie Orcutt in Ward 3, but it just seems that I've had a lot of conversation with him over the summer, and I'm eager to work with him. We talked about that the railroad crossing over by Hummel Road going towards the Ford plant. I think we should do something with that. I think we should redo it. It's horrible. You drive by there, one day the orange cone's on the ground, next day he's disappeared. It's just not to my liking. And I hope it's not to any of yours. And I hope it's not to the new mayors. I hope we could sit down and start getting some pricing. I've just made 4 or 5 suggestions, and I would love to see them all happen. I think they're all doable. And I'll sit back, I'll shut my mouth and listen to what the rest of the council has to say. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Salvatore. Mr. Bergio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rick, some of those ideas I think are really good. I know that the Beautification Pride Committee thinks along those lines too. I think they'd be happy to get behind it and support that too. And I think this is something that all of council and the mayor can kind of work together on and kind of bring us together and just to make Brook Park proud of who we are. And I think some of these things are going to be really beneficial and positive for our community. You haven't had all the details. I'm sure you have a lot more ideas, and I'm kind of interested to hear some of the details of what we can do. But I think that this is something that really could be some fun projects for our city, and I think it really is good for the community. And as you mentioned, people wanting to move into Brook Park and be proud of their city. And so I'm looking forward to some of these ideas. So I think that there's a lot of things that we can do, and I'm looking forward to hear more of those. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, if I can answer that question.
Sure, go ahead, Mr. Salvatore.
Yeah, I do have some of the detail. We're glad to share it with you.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
Mr. Poindexter.
Thank you, Council President. I agree. I think doctoring up and sprucing up our areas off the exits to our city are a great idea. And actually, I'd like to even go a step further and maybe try to get some really, maybe reach out to some really recognizable businesses to maybe take interest and to maybe planting their flag, like right off one of our intersections to the interstate, and maybe we can get people from other cities to come to Brook Park, and then they'll start venturing inland a little bit more and kind of see some of the other great things that our city has to offer. So I think these ideas will really be the start of something like that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Poindexter. Mr. Orcutt.
I just wanted to say, Mr. Salvatore, you presented that very well. I think it's a wonderful idea. We did have a lot of conversations about it. And to the mayor, too, I'm going to include you in on this. I think this is just gonna be the greatest marketing tool this city can use right now. And I think the people out there, the residents, they voted for us. They voted for a new standard in Brook Park. They want change. They want to see something new. They want to see something brighter. And I think this is something that the council and the administration can work on together to give back to the people. And we can use this as a marketing tool for the future to bring in that business. So I just wanted to thank you, Councilman Salvatore. Great presentation, and I'm looking forward to working with you on this.
Thank you, Mr. Orcutt. Mr. Mancini.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again. I thought my colleague, Mr. Poindexter, made a good point when he brought up businesses. Through my time working for the city, through my time on council, if somebody could tell me when the great relationship we had with our businesses, I don't think we've had. I know some people might be disappointed to hear that, but we get something from Sharon Zimmer from the Chamber of Commerce all the time on our emails of things happening, and it just doesn't seem like maybe other cities that, you know, we have that collaboration with them. Councilman Bergio's right that, you know, the beautification and pride, there's people out there that want to help. There's people that want to do things. Maybe a good example is, as Mr. Salvatore brought up, when you come out of that airport, probably maybe not one of the prettiest sights. Rudy, who unfortunately passed away, I believe last year, used to come to that mic and say that. Says, you know, one of the first things you see when you come to Cleveland is that nice, if you want to call it, nice little picture of the Ford plant and everything else. Not pretty. So I think that's one area. The welcome to Brook Park signs, things of that sort. You see some of these cities, they have some beautiful displays. And a lot of that is business, volunteer, labor unions coming to volunteer, even a lot of residents. I know I say that a lot. It's not just sometimes council and the mayor, sometimes it's a community involvement. Our building fronts, you know, I look at the front of the rec center on Holland Road. I mean, I just think right outside of this council chambers, and I love that my colleague, Mr. Salvatore, brought this forward, because if you can remember about 3 years ago when me and you were walking out on a hot day, we got out of here a little early, and I remember you looking back and saying, I mean, just look at the evergreen, whatever we have out there, and they were, you know, I think it could be a lot more sightly. A lot of our municipality buildings is what I'm saying, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. So, I mean, them are the directions we got to go, and I'll finish with this, you know, it's great, and I have heard it a lot the last 4 years. Well, let's do it, But I would say 70 to 80% of the times it doesn't get done. You have to move on it. I think that's a good point, and Mr. Salvatore, Councilman Salvatore, brought that up. You have to move on it. You just can't, you know, talk about it. It's something that, you know. And again, there's a lot of people in this community that would sure like to work on some projects like that. Community involvement. So that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mancini. Mr. Stem.
Yeah, I also agree with Councilman Salvador. Curb appeal, you know, is very important for the city. Our ball diamonds out there are refurbished over the last few years, and I think they're the best in the county. And I played softball all over, so I think we have to continue this and move forward with it.
Thank you, Mr. Stem. Anyone else? I'd like to say the same thing. Again, I think it's a great idea proposed by Mr. Salvatore. You know, I think everybody's heard me say it and say this statement, and some may have not, but you know, we have to honor the past, but we have to work to the future, and this is there's no better way than what I'm seeing proposed here, and I think this sets the tone for the city and for its future, you know, and right now, this council and this administration could be viewed as trendsetters. Need an action, gentlemen.
Motion was discussed.
Support.
Motion on the floor that this was discussed, properly supported. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Michelle, please call the roll.
Salvatore,
Yes.
Mancini,
Yes.
Poindexter,
Yes.
Stem,
Yes.
Orcutt,
Yes.
Bergio,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Motion been approved. Final item is adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Support.
Motion on the floor to adjourn, properly supported. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Michelle, please call the roll.
Bergio,
Yes.
Mancini,
Yes.
Poindexter,
Yes.
Salvatore,
Yes.
Stem,
Yes.
Orcutt,
Yes.
Scott.
Yes.
This meeting is adjourned at 8:16. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break in between the two meetings, and we'll start the special council meeting immediately following. Thank you.